Now, for more on this trade, we bring in our guys, Colin Ward, Henniger, and James Herbert to talk some of this trade here in the NBA. Kyrie headed to Dallas. Get your initial reaction. Colin, I'll start with you.
I'm surprised it happened this quickly, frankly. I mean, I think the writing was on the wall. Obviously, Kyrie had made the trade request after the contract extension talks did not go the way that he pleased, and things had accelerated leading up to this week that, hey, Kyrie was probably going to be dealt. It wasn't going to be a situation like Kevin Durant's trade request where they kind of waited him out and hoped that things worked out. It was pretty clear that that wasn't going to be the case with Kyrie. But even with that said, I expected them to wait, closer to the deadline, Thursday's deadline, to actually make the deal and see what happened. But the fact that he went to Dallas, a little bit shocking to me. I was expecting the Lakers, but Dallas was certainly the next option there. So I'm still processing all of this. But my initial reaction is that I'm a little shocked that it happened this quickly. But Dallas isn't that shocking to me as a destination.
James,
yeah, I mean, I wasn't sure that anybody was going to meet the Nets' price on this kind of deal. Like, I sort of looked at this situation as like Kyrie doesn't have a lot of leverage. He tried a very similar thing back in June when he wanted the Nets to give them an extension, gave them a list of teams. They couldn't execute a sign and trade. Now, I mean, they're closer to his free agency. I guess they changed their price a little bit and Dallas met it. Like, Brooklyn has been very intent this entire time throughout the Kevin Durant trade request, throughout everything that this team has been through, that it is all about trying to compete for a championship right now. And I'm curious to see what Sean Marks says about this when he gets in front of a microphone and discusses this trade. I'm guessing that what they'll try to say is that they're going to be an improved defensive team, a more balanced team this season. The goal hasn't changed at all. And I kind of understand that. I do think Dorian Finney-Smith is a very high-level defender, and the Nets now just kind of have a ridiculous collection of two-way wings, which is very different than what they were last year going into the playoffs. Their offensive ceiling is not quite as high as it was. Obviously, without Kyrie Irving on the team, there's going to be more pressure on Kevin Durant when he gets back healthy. But the Nets are extremely familiar with Spencer Dinwiddie, obviously, and they have some more picks to play with. And there's also a few days for the Nets to figure out maybe there's some other kind of moves that they can make to, change this roster a little bit more, maybe add a little bit more playmaking now that they have downgraded on the offensive end from Kyrie Irving to Spencer Dinwiddie. But I don't think value-wise that's a horrible trade for them or anything. It just, this wasn't necessarily the exact package that I would have predicted would get it done.
This package, though, that Dallas now receives, James, you have to hope that they feel this can push them over the hump to compete in the Western Conference. Where do you think they now stack up?
I don't think this makes them a contender at all in the Western Conference. I think this is much more about sort of putting Kyrie Irving next to Luka Doncic for the next few years and telling superstars around the league, like, okay, we already had one player everybody would love to play with in Luka. Now you can be the missing link here. If you are the next superstar that wants to demand a trade, then the Mavs can welcome them in. Maybe they can try to clear cap space in other ways. I don't think they're going to be a good enough defensive team to get it done this year. I think this makes them much worse on that end. If you look at their numbers this year compared to last year, it's not that the offense has gotten horrible. It's that the defense was surprisingly great last year as a top 10 defense. And this year they've just been flat out bad on that end. And this does nothing to address that whatsoever. It gives Luka Doncic more support offensively. Obviously, I think they'll be better offensively when Doncic is on the bench now that Kyrie can come in there and play with some space and do his thing. And he'll also make life a bit easier on Luka when the two were sharing the court in the way that Jalen Brunson did. But in terms of their immediate hopes for contention, no, I don't think this really does much for the Mavericks at all.
Yeah, I'm with James on this one. I don't see the Mavericks really catapulting themselves into the upper echelon of the Western Conference. I think this is more a play to placate Luka Doncic. And, there were rumblings earlier that he was talking to the front office about not having enough help. And this is clearly a move to say, hey, look, man, we are giving you help. Now, how this plays out, as James said, there are still moves to be made. Dallas has nowhere near a complete roster that's ready to compete for a title, particularly given Kyrie Irving's, issues. We can't ignore the fact that he has kind of flaked on his team multiple times, including this latest trade request, not to mention the off-court controversy that he's gotten himself into. So is Kyrie Irving a reliable second star for the next 3-4 years? Absolutely not. So it's a risky move to me for the Mavericks to say, hey, Luka, we've got your guy. We've got your second in command on your team. And it's a guy who is not available very often, whether it's through injury or these other issues we're talking about. As James mentioned, the defense for the Mavericks has gone way down. It's almost like the Nets and Mavericks have switched teams here. Now the Nets have one superstar and these kind of well-fitting role players around him. And now the Mavericks have these two very, very talented offensive players, but no defense and very few role players around them. So for the Mavericks, I understand the move if Luka Doncic was putting pressure on them to get him a second star. But man, this is one of the riskiest players in the league that you can possibly attach yourself to. So we'll see how that goes for Dallas.
Colin, KD and Kyrie played in only 74 games together during their time out there in Brooklyn. How will they be remembered as a franchise, and kind of where does this put the Nets now?
Yeah, I mean, it has to be remembered as a failure, right? KD and Kyrie got together. They were supposed to be this Eastern Conference power. Obviously, they brought James Harden in. That team was unbelievable when they were actually on the court together, but they never got to play because of injuries. And then James Harden asked out, and the dominoes just started falling from there. So for the Nets, this has to be looked at as a failed experiment, which is crazy. Because, Sean Marks, the front office there, they were being lauded for how they had come from nothing, trading away all their picks in these horrible deals back to contention, back to relevance. And now we're looking at them with Kevin Durant, and we have to see. Look, I think they did the best that they could getting win now pieces with Dorian Finney-Smith and Spencer Dinwiddie, plus a future draft pick to be able to tell Kevin Durant that, look, we can still contend. But if things don't get better towards the end of this year, they have a first-round exit in the playoffs, something like that, you have to question whether Kevin Durant is going to renew that trade request and say, hey, look, this just didn't work out. It's time to cut bait. So all eyes on Brooklyn for me right now.
Yeah, it's wild when you think back to when Durant and Irving teamed up. It seemed like absolutely anything was possible in Brooklyn. There were a lot of interesting supporting cast members on that team, including one Spencer Dinwiddie, who had recruited Kyrie Irving to the Nets. And the big question was, were they going to try to cash in some of those other pieces, Dinwiddie, Karis LeVert, Jared Allen, to get another star? Or were they going to just sort of use those guys as the way to kind of balance out the rest of the team and just keep those guys that were the core of the team before as sort of the role players around KD and Kyrie? What has happened since then? A whole ton has happened since then. They go and get James Harden. The highs were extremely high with him. That's some of the best offensive basketball that has ever been played in the NBA when those big three were on the court together, but they were hardly on the court together. They might have won a title a couple of years ago had Harden and Irving not both gotten injured. But last year it devolved into a bit of a circus. Kyrie Irving deciding that he didn't want to get vaccinated really ruined the Nets season. That was part of the reason why Harden demanded a trade. He got his way. Durant demands a trade. Irving demands a trade. There's just been so much crazy stuff that has happened in this time, and Brooklyn would like to tell you that, okay, don't write the story yet. The Durant Irving era is over, but Kevin Durant was always the number one guy. He was always the franchise player, and I think the Nets would like to tell you they are still going after that championship, and this thing isn't over. But in terms of just sort of the promise of having those superstars together and what they could have theoretically accomplished, obviously never able to sustain that. They were never able to win that title, and people are going to look back at that partnership and wonder just how this could have turned out differently.
Yeah, certainly will be very interesting to monitor to see what this does for Dallas and where Brooklyn goes from here. Already reports saying that the Suns are prepared to pursue KD should he become available. So could have more movement even before the trade deadline coming up in the NBA on Thursday. Gentlemen, thank you very much for tapping in with us with this breaking news surrounding Kyrie Irving headed to the Dallas Mavericks. A recap of that trade: Dallas getting Kyrie Irving and Markieff Morris. Going to Brooklyn is Spencer Dinwiddie and Dorian Finney-Smith, along with 3 picks, the number one of those being the first-round pick in 2029. That one is unprotected. We mentioned Bill Ryder, so it's only right that we bring him in right now. Bill, this shocking news. We knew that Kyrie likely was going to be traded ever since he first announced that he wanted to be traded, and that news broke. Now that you see that it ends up being Dallas and not some of the others like the Lakers or the Clippers who were in the running and wanted to bring in Kyrie, what's your reaction here?
Yeah, Zach, my reaction is it's a pretty nice return for the Brooklyn Nets. I know yesterday several folks, including GMs around the NBA, were just skeptical whether, given Kyrie's struggles and difficulties and some of the issues that have made him less appealing to other teams out there, given all of that, whether Kyrie would command the kind of return that Brooklyn was certainly going to want, because they're effectively giving up on their season. It is not a bad haul for Brooklyn, given the circumstances and given the fact that Kyrie had not only said he wanted to be traded, but in the last 2 hours, the reporting had come out that he might sit if he wasn't moved. And when you're in that kind of a corner, it's sometimes hard to get what you want coming back. I think Brooklyn did that. And now the question becomes, is the juice worth the squeeze for Dallas? Sources yesterday told me they were one of the 2 or maybe 3 teams, the Lakers and maybe the Clippers, who would be interested enough to perhaps drive the price up. They've surrounded Luka Doncic with a star. He's obviously mercurial. It'll be very interesting, Zach, to see whether or not this leads to success for Dallas the rest of the way.
Yeah, we'll certainly circle back on Brooklyn and what this means for them going forward. But you look at this Dallas squad currently sitting at 28-26 in the Western Conference, 9.5 games back of Denver. We knew that they needed another piece. That became very apparent, especially when Luka missed some time, and you heard Jason Kidd say they need someone to step up. That was at one time Spencer Dinwiddie. But ever since losing Jalen Brunson, it seems like that they've missed him desperately. So now they get a piece like Kyrie. What can this do for Dallas?
It depends how you view Kyrie Irving. He's a litmus test. He's a Rorschach test, I should say. People see in him whatever they think about Kyrie Irving, the player and leader. I can tell you some GMs out there think that he is worth whatever difficulties come with Kyrie Irving, and some don't. I'm probably in the camp that is skeptical it's going to work out, but Zach, you hit on it. You've got another all-world scorer. You've got help for Luka Doncic, the kind of offensive help that you have to have, especially when you get into playoff basketball, best-of-7 series, rotations that shorten up, defenses that tend to improve, half-court offenses. You're not going to run and gun as much. And so if Kyrie can replicate not just his talent, but the success we saw him have with LeBron James in Cleveland, Dallas becomes absolutely good enough in a really crowded Western Conference, especially with the question marks around Steph Curry and his health. Dallas becomes good enough to be a real contender. We've seen Luka Doncic carry this team basically by himself. They had Brunson, but basically by himself to a conference finals. And so Kyrie Irving's addition on paper, I think it makes them a contender. The issue becomes, Zach, and the reason not as many teams were in a bidding war for Kyrie Irving as they might have been 2 or 3 years ago, if we've seen Kyrie hold his organization hostage. We've seen him miss time for a variety of reasons. And the stats are the stats. This is a Brooklyn team that has been statistically better. They've won more games when he has sat than when he has played. So it's hard to know who you're getting in Kyrie Irving, but for a team like Dallas, desperate to do something right now and to surround Luka Doncic with someone, it's a risk that makes sense.
Is it a risk that you think is going to be worth it? Kyrie's contract is up at the end of this year. Do you think he would consider re-signing there, or is this just a one half of a season opportunity for Dallas to strike gold here?
It's a great question. It's the big question. I guess there's a few answers. One, that would be quite a sizable gamble by Dallas if they don't think Kyrie was going to stick around. I was talking to a league source yesterday, literally asked him, Zach, the exact question you asked me. If Kyrie goes somewhere that's not Los Angeles, California. So Dallas was the example I used. But I said, let's say it's a Dallas or a Chicago or somewhere that we haven't had indications in the past Kyrie wants to stay. Will he stick around if he's traded there? And this league source, familiar with Kyrie's thinking and familiar with some of the teams involved, told me the view around the NBA is that Kyrie simply wants to find a place that he can win and that he can get paid. An organization that will pay him, let's say 4 years, more or less a max deal. So I would assume, Zach, that Dallas is back-channeled with Kyrie Irving and the people representing him, and that the understanding is that they will offer him some kind of a deal that he's amenable to and that he will take that deal, which is, I guess, a long-rounded way to say, yeah, I think he will stay there. I can't imagine Dallas would have made this move that they didn't think he was going to stick around. But again, the Nets also thought they were getting something in Kyrie Irving. They didn't. We know Kyrie can change his mind. So it's an open-ended question. I think he'll stay, but you never know where Kyrie's going to be in a month or a couple months after this experience in Dallas, and whether it goes well or whether it goes badly.
I think one thing that's for sure you really can't debate is that Kyrie's the top 5 point guard in this league right now when he's out there playing. How does he match up with Luka on the field? Who's going to be on the court? Who's going to be the one on the ball? How are they going to make that work? And will it result in success?
Well, I'll respectfully disagree. I think it is debatable, and I think that's the big issue with Kyrie. And again, this is me just referencing people who run NBA teams around the league, not my perspective. Some people think he's a top 5 point guard, and some people think that he's not. And I think that's part of the reason you only had 2 or 3 teams that were in the mix here. But to answer your question, if you come down, and Dallas does, on the side that this guy is that talented and is that capable, he does one of the hardest things there is to do in the NBA. He can go and get you buckets by himself, create his own space, create his own shot, break down defenses. When he's in the right spot, when he's in the right fit, especially, and we've seen this with LeBron and with Kevin Durant, when he's surrounded by another all-world player, and certainly Luka Doncic is that. The upside here, the ceiling for Kyrie Irving, is that he's more than capable of playing like a number 2 on a championship-level team. He can help, as you noted, if Luka Doncic, let's say injured, but just not having to load the minutes up on Luka. He can take 5 or 10 or 15 or 20 or 36 minutes in a game here or there and be the offensive focal point. He can't do it night after night after night. We've certainly seen that in Brooklyn. So it's a huge offensive help. It's a huge secondary weapon. And when we get to the postseason, because all the stats people will throw at you about Kyrie not being as effective in terms of winning over the course of his time when he's on the bench versus starting, those are all regular season stats. And even though the Nets have struggled at times in the postseason, it's a different game, as you know, Zach, in the playoffs. The ability to go out there and have one guy who can win you a game or a couple games is huge. Kyrie Irving's one of those players in the NBA. You put him with Luka Doncic, and it makes Dallas a lot more dangerous, potentially, than they were.
I just want to touch real quick on Brooklyn now, the other side of this trade. What does this mean for them going forward and the potential for KD? What happens with him now?
Yeah, another great and critical question. I mean, I don't know because the people that I've talked to don't know, but I can tell you there are some hungry GMs for talent who have been making calls and are anticipating the possibility that Kevin Durant could be available between now and Thursday's NBA trade deadline. And while the folks I've talked to aren't ruling that out, the general sense, Zach, I get around the league is that you have to get such a haul for Kevin Durant if you're going to move him. Or if Kevin Durant decides he wants to be moved, and we've already seen him make that demand before, that it might make more sense as a summer trade. You want to involve as many teams as possible. You want to get as many assets as possible. So I think it's certainly likely, I think it's certainly plausible that Kevin Durant's going to stay with the Brooklyn Nets. He's going to try to carry a team that doesn't have Kyrie Irving. Their chances are severely diminished, at least on paper, of being a contender this year. But I do think that there's a sense, in fact, I know there's a sense around the NBA, this is probably, and nobody knows, the beginning of the end of Durant's time in Brooklyn, New York, and that this summer, if he wants to move, would be the time there would be a sizable bidding war for one of the most talented players on the face of the earth.
What does it maybe say about this Nets organization that went through so much with Kyrie last season and then this season and just this whole experiment not working out? Where do they go to from here?
Yeah, I mean, again, like I feel like I'm taking too many shots at Kyrie because there are people that would certainly sign up for Kyrie in a heartbeat, but I do think it reminds you that if you're going to take the keys to the kingdom and put them in the hands of star players, and that's the modern NBA, and I think it should be, I mean, these are the guys that really give you a chance, you have to make sure that those star players are in for the long haul and are the kind of leaders you want them to be. And Kyrie Irving was one of those guys, was instrumental, mostly along with Kevin Durant, but instrumental in decision-making and who they wanted in, who was going to be the coach, who wasn't going to be the coach. And I think the lesson is be careful who you trust with your organization. I can tell you this, Zach, if you're Sean Marks, you're the GM in Brooklyn. You go back several years. He had taken one of the worst teams in terms of how they were positioned for the future. The draft picks they had and really didn't have the hole they were in going all the way back to the Kevin Garnett trade and company with the Celtics. He dug them out of it. He built a really interesting young team. They had something that was probably trending toward really successful. And they did what any GM in the NBA would do. They got Kyrie, they got Kevin Durant. They were a shoe size, the proper shoe size away from being in a conference finals or maybe further, maybe NBA champions, and it didn't work out. So if you're Brooklyn, you probably have to take stock of the gamble you took the last few years on these two stars, and when you reset, if Sean Marks is given the opportunity to do that by his owner, you probably have to understand that next time around, you want to make sure if you're going to allow superstar players to make decisions, that they're in it for the long haul and the leverage they throw around is for the best interest of the Nets and not just what they want to do in the short term.
Crazy roller coaster out there in Brooklyn. You figure just a few weeks ago, back when KD was still healthy, they were a team that was looking like they were going to challenge the Celtics for the best record out there in the Eastern Conference, and now they break things up with Kyrie being traded out to the Dallas Mavericks. He's our Bill Ryder. Thank you very much for talking some NBA breaking news on this Sunday afternoon. Kyrie headed to Dallas. You see his career, team number 4 now on tap. Best seasons of his career, point-wise, came when he was with the Nets, averaged 27.1, averaging 27.1 again this season, and now he heads out to Dallas to team up with Luka Doncic, a team that's in 6th place in the Western Conference, 9.5 games back of the Denver Nuggets. Brooklyn looking for some answers now with some pieces that they'll get back in return and some draft capital. But for now, Kyrie Irving traded to the Dallas Mavericks. We'll have a lot more on HQ to talk about this monster trade on the other side.
Do you want a sports network that delivers everything that matters about the game? The highlights, the picks, the instant analysis, no yelling, no fake debates, no politics. Hit the subscribe button and never miss a moment.